Welcome to the Best Interest Podcast, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cramer.
Hello and welcome to episode 94 of the Best Interest Podcast. My name is Jesse Cramer.
Got an interesting one today. It's going to be a bit of a monologue, and I want to share with you a couple different things. I want to share with you some of my unconventional personal finance opinions. I think there's some interesting stuff there to talk about. And then I want to share how I've changed my mind over time. Some topics that I used to think one thing and now I think another thing. Going over topics like this is really helpful because even if you don't always agree with me, I think it's going to be helpful to see how other people out there think, and maybe it will shape some of your opinions in a new way.
But first, as always, let's do a review of the week. As always, this review comes from Apple Podcasts, and Man from Tondo, Manila left a 5-star review, and it says, American Dream Found. Thank you, Jesse. As an immigrant from a third world country, my American dream is to work and buy things to make me look so successful. Your podcast changes that view. And now I have a great vision for my finance. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Man from Tondo, Manila, because I do think, hard work is important and it is fun to buy things, but just working and making money and buying things isn't necessarily what I would call a view of success. And I'm glad that the Best Interest Podcast has helped you, shift your mindset there. So, Man from Tondo, Manila, if you hear this, shoot me an email, jesse@bestinterest.blog, and we will get you set up with a super soft Best Interest t-shirt.
Let's dive into it. We're going to talk about, two types of ideas today. The first one are my unconventional personal finance opinions. Contrarianism, at least I think contrarianism is always interesting, not only because it's disagreeable, but because it begs the question, why? Why does someone think the things they think? Why do they disagree with what I think? While opinions like that grab the headlines, the explanations behind the opinions, that's what contains the real knowledge. That's the cool part, and I hope to dive into some of that today. And then I'm going to share how I've changed my mind over time. December of 2023, this past December, was the 5-year anniversary of the Best Interest, and I've changed my mind a lot over that time. I've changed my mind on budgeting, on spending habits, on investing topics, and more. And again, understanding why someone changes their mind provides interesting perspective on long-held beliefs. I'm not asking you guys to change your minds today too, but if you do end up asking yourself even one good question about your current personal beliefs at some point during today's episodes, I think it'll be time well spent. Let's dive into some of my unconventional personal finance opinions. The first one, the FIRE movement's obsession with 100% VTSAX or similar thoughts is stupid. Okay, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, some people in the financial independence movement preach that an investment portfolio should be 100% VTSAX, which is the Vanguard's total US stock market index fund, 100%. Now, the reason why this is stupid is there's a few reasons why. One reason is because it flies in the face of any sort of asset liability matching or goals-based investing or bucketing your money. It flies in the face of those kinds of topics because if your portfolio is 100% invested in the US stock market, it means that the spending that you're planning on this year and next year and then the year after that, that near-term spending, you're depending on stocks for that. And that's a really big risk because we know that the stock market can and has before dropped 20 or 30 or 40% in a given year. And in that scenario, this early retiree is going to have to pull on their stocks when their stocks are down. And that's something that isn't ideal for portfolio construction. The thought process that many people in the FIRE movement have is they say, listen, I understand market history. I've back tested this strategy. It's not going to bother me when my market drops 40 or 50% in a year. I can handle it. That might be true. And I think for some people, it is true. However, investing in bear markets, it's one of those things that until you live through it, it's really hard to understand how you'll react. I think a lot of people out there can say, yeah, whatever, 40%, it's just a number, right? Who cares? But when you're living through it and your $1 million portfolio is now $600,000, when you've lost $400,000 on paper, and now you're early retired, and now you have to pull on those assets. So you're withdrawing after that 40% drawdown. In practice, a lot of people that I talk to realize that their feelings about that 100% stock portfolio change. It's like that Mike Tyson quote, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. That plan of 100% stock index fund, it sounds good on paper. And for some people, it is right on paper. But for some people, it's only right on paper because when the stock market does punch them in the face, they realize that they've been caught offsides. They realize that they're in a position that they never wanted to be in, and that at least some sort of safer allocation, bonds would be a traditional example, even cash can be a good example. There's a well-known portfolio out there that's 75% stocks, 25% cash. And that cash is meant as a short-term buffer. It's where you're going to pull money from in the next few years, just in case your stocks do drop and they need time to recover. So, beaten that one enough. That's my first unconventional opinion that the FIRE movement's obsession with 100% US stock market portfolios is stupid. The second one, you're going to pay taxes. And most tax hacks are either wrong or illegal. One example being the child Roth IRA hack, or another one being that the business owners pay no taxes hacks. A third one being that everything can be written off. All of these are stupid hacks. And the fact of the matter is that you would do much better if you simply accepted the fact that you are going to pay taxes. There are certainly some things you can do to try to minimize taxes over time. But if something feels like a hack, you should always sort of question it. Now, let me go into some of those examples. The child Roth IRA hack. What this hack says is that if you're a business owner, even if you're not a business owner, you can start a business, is what they say. So that's step one, is you have to start a business. And step two is that you employ your child. Even if your child is like 2 years old, they become an employee. You pay them a salary. It doesn't have to be much, but the child has earned income. Ideally, the earned income is at least as much as what the Roth IRA limits are. So this year, the Roth IRA limits are $7,000. So let's say you pay your child $10,000 in income. And then because the child has earned income, they can contribute money into a Roth IRA. So you can set up a Roth IRA for your kid and put $7,000 in it, even though they're 2 years old, and you're setting them off on an amazing start for their long-term investing career. Then you, as the business owner, you paid them $10,000. So that payroll is a write-off for you as a business owner, so it saves you taxes. It's like a win-win-win. Okay, that's what the hack is. But the reason why you really need to be careful here is because you need to justify to the IRS that your child did $10,000 worth of work and provided $10,000 worth of value to your company. Now, if the child's 2, you're going to have a hard time defending that. If the child's 12, right, and they're out there, you're paying them $20 an hour, and they're out there for 500 hours over the course of the year, sweeping the shop and stapling papers and licking envelopes. I mean, yeah, there definitely are some ways that you can use this quote unquote hack. It will benefit you in the way that it's described. But the way that I've seen it described way too often is this idea that basically your kid doesn't have to do anything for you. All you have to do is put them on payroll, pay them money, and then boom, magically you win the game. And that's just not true. The other one that I mentioned before, the idea that business owners pay no taxes. I mean, there is a little bit of truth that business expenses are written off against business revenue. But ultimately, if a business owner finds himself in a place where they pay no taxes, the reason why is because they had no revenue. They had no profits from that year. And that's not exactly a place where you want to be if you're running a business. There might be exceptions. You can think about some of these giant corporations like Amazon or Apple that move their operations to places like Ireland that have minimum or zero corporate taxes. And therefore, those businesses get away with having very, very small tax bills. But for the average mom and pop kind of business owner running the local restaurant or garage or something like that, if you pay no taxes, that's a sign that your business is not doing well. That's my second unconventional personal finance opinion. It applies to business owners. It applies to individuals. You are going to pay taxes, and most tax hacks are either wrong or illegal. Number 3 pertains to 529 college savings plans. I think people should use the 50% rule when it comes to their 529 college savings plans. I'm going to explain what that rule is. And I even think that's true with the new Roth IRA conversion rule, which I'll explain that as well. So if you're saving for your kids' college, step number 1 is to determine as a family or with your partner how much money you want to set aside for your kids. So for this easy hypothetical, let's say that you have 2 kids. You want to set aside $100,000 for each of them for their future college. So you can figure out what their timeline is to college. You can assume some sort of conservative rate of return on your investments. And with a pretty simple spreadsheet or with the help of some sort of financial professional, you can put a plan together. how much money you need to set aside right now, or how much money you need to set aside each year from now until they go to college to reach that $100,000 goal for each kid. But now the question is, where does that $100,000 or where does that investing money go? Does it go into a 529 plan? And now this is where the 50% rule comes in. I believe that 50% of the money should go into a 529 plan. The other 50% of the money should go into a taxable brokerage account that, at least in your mind, using mental accounting, you have set that taxable brokerage account aside for college funding. There's a few reasons why. 529 plans are famously illiquid and they're very rigid. And that's not good for you as the owner of the 529 plan. The illiquidity means that if you need to pull money out of the 529 plan, say in a couple years because of some sort of emergency, you're going to have to pay income tax on all the gains, and you're going to have to pay a 10% penalty if you use that money for something that isn't education spending. And the other problem is you don't want to end up in a situation where you have overfunded your 529 plans. We talked about that a few episodes ago. I think it was episode 69, I want to say, with Sean Mullaney. We talked about the idea of overfunding 529s, and that's another place where you don't want to be as an investor. You don't want to be in a place where you have put more money than you expected or more money than you wanted to or more money than you could use into a 529 plan, because the only way to get it out, or at least the most common way that you're going to be forced to get that money out, is by paying taxes and paying a penalty. You're better off intentionally underfunding your 529 plans, hence only putting 50% of the goal money into the 529 plan. You're intentionally underfunding. You're essentially guaranteeing that you're going to use that entire 529 money for the kid's college. And then the other 50% goes into a taxable brokerage account. It's more flexible in case you need it early. And in case it goes unused, you're going to get access to it penalty free. Of course, the downside there is that you don't get the tax advantages of the 529 plan if the money's in a taxable brokerage. But in the long run, that's not that big of a deal. That's another thing we talked about with Sean Mullaney, is that the tax benefits of the 529, they're certainly nice, but they're not out of this world. So you're securing some of those tax benefits by using the 50% rule, but you're also ensuring you don't face any of the downsides of the 529 at the same time. That's take number 3, that for 529 plans, you should use the 50% rule.
Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Every week, I send a quick free email to thousands of readers that shares 3 simple things. 1, my new articles and podcasts. 2, the best financial content of the week from all over the internet. And 3, a financial chart that explains some important concept in the news that week. It's a great primer to boost your financial know-how.
But Jesse, I don't want another email.
Well, this might not be for you, but I do hear you, which is why I make it very short, sweet, and full of only the essentials. A whopping 66% of subscribers read my email at least once a month. They're enjoying it, and maybe you will too. You can subscribe for free on the homepage at bestinterest.blog. Again, that's a free, no strings attached subscription at bestinterest.blog.
Take number 4, your primary home is not an investment. This is something I've talked about before, I've written about before. I wrote about it at length because last summer, Kelly and I, we bought what I hope at least is our forever home here in suburban Rochester. At the time, mortgage rates were 6.5%, which did not feel good, especially because the year before they were 3% or something like that. But ultimately, one of the main reasons why we bought the home is because of the thinking that your primary home is not an investment. Your primary home is a place to meet your family's needs. First and foremost, it's a place to live. If it happens to be a good investment in the long run, that'll just be a cherry on top. If it happens to be a terrible investment in the long run, that won't feel great if the value goes down in the long run. It's certainly a very expensive asset. And because it's expensive and because it costs money to keep up a house or to fix a house, that kind of thing, we plan on taking great care of it. It certainly is an asset from that point of view. But an asset is not the same as an investment. Investments produce cash flow. Stocks, bonds, they produce cash flow. Real estate produces cash flow when someone else is living in it and paying you rent. That's true. But your primary home doesn't produce any cash flow for you. And so for that reason, I don't think you should think of your primary home as an investment. And when you're shopping for a primary home, I don't think it's smart, or it certainly shouldn't be a primary concern, to try to do any sort of investment calculations and have that weigh into whether or not the home that you think you want is right for you. Ultimately, it's what neighborhood do you want to live in? What school district do you want to live in? How many bedrooms and bathrooms do you need so that you and your family are comfortable? Those are the primary questions that you should be asking yourself, not what's the 20-year IRR of this house going to be. Let's take number 4. Your primary home is not an investment. Controversial take number 5. Side hustles are usually a waste of time. I think if you scoped around the personal finance space, you're very frequently going to see people say things like, oh, increase your income, pick up a side hustle, do a few side hustles. There's so many great ways to do side hustles and make side income. Some people call this financial pornography, stuff you see on like MSN or CNBC with these really outrageous headlines of this 24-year-old works 5 hours per month and her income is $300,000. And you're like, whoa, what does she do? And the answer is like she sells color by number books to 4-year-olds on Etsy. And she's like, yeah, it was just a side hustle. And now I'm a billionaire. I sell color by number books. You buy crayons, color, and I'm the queen of that. And you're just like, man, can I do something like that too? Of course, that is the exception, not the rule. Those articles are a perfect example of what's called survivorship bias, where we hear stories about survivors and we often don't hear the stories about the failures. And I think most people who try to do color by number books on Etsy end up failing. But even there's just more mundane examples like Uber driving. If you were to run the math on Uber driving, you would realize that it's a really hard way to make any sort of money. And odds are the average Uber driver is making somewhere around minimum wage if they're lucky. The side hustle in that case isn't really good. That person would probably be better off just spending more time on their primary job. Now, there are, of course, exceptions. A good friend of mine and a friend of the blog, I'm going to leave him anonymous just because I didn't run this by him beforehand. He's a good friend of the best interest, and he started a side hustle probably about 10 years ago, and it involved a specific group of products that he was selling in a little online store through Amazon. So he's like, all right, this little niche, and I'm just going to try to make really high quality products and differentiate myself, and I'm just going to have better products than my competitors on Amazon. And he was successful at that. And eventually that side hustle, he was able to double and triple down on it. He quit his main job, his full-time job. And he recently sold that side hustle business, which grew into like a 20 employee business or something like that. And he sold it for a very large sum of money, more than single digit millions, I'll say that. And so he's an exception where that side hustle turned into something that was life-changing. But the question that I think we should all ask ourselves, and the differentiating question between this friend of the blog and podcast and the average Uber driver, the question to ask is, what's the upper limit of this? And then how much time will I give myself to reach that upper limit? Now, when you're really starting a true side business, there's a pretty high upper limit. And if you're seeing success there, I think it's reasonable to give yourself quite a bit of time to reach those goals. Ultimately, maybe I'm being hypocritical here. The best interest, you can think of that as a side hustle. I've been running it for 5 years. If it's been profitable, it's barely been profitable as its own entity. But over the last 2 years now, the best interest has been going kind of side by side with what I'm doing in my day job, right? I work for a wealth management firm, educating, meeting clients, talking to clients, working with clients by day. And then I come here by night and educate and bring cool knowledge to everyone here who's a fan of the best interest. And a lot of that is swimming in the same direction. So it's like, okay, my side hustle, if you will, has a really strong overlap with my day job at this point. And I feel like the upper limit of the best interest is reasonably high and can bring me success professionally. And I'm willing to put in a lot of time. Also, I'm just having a lot of fun. Ultimately, guys, I might have talked about this before. And since this is a bit of a monologue episode, I can go down this little rabbit trail here. I have so much fun writing and podcasting, meeting really cool people, bringing guests onto the podcast, answering your questions via email, reading your reviews, like the interaction that we have here. It's so much fun for me. So for that reason alone, I'm going to continue doing it. But then when I think about the upper limit, it's like, yeah, this is a great side hustle for me personally. If you want to pursue side hustles in your own life, I would ask yourself those questions. What's the upper limit of this side hustle? And how much time will I give myself to get there? Because most of the time, side hustles are a waste of time. And that was number 5. Okay, number 6, rent versus buy. My opinion, neither one is great. Okay, the fundamental questions are numbers and landlord. Those are the 2 questions you have to ask when it comes to the rent versus buy question. So the first one, of course, is just what is the math? What are the numbers when it comes to what you might want to go rent? What are the numbers of any sort of house where you might want to buy? There are some numbers involved. And one of the most fundamental questions, actually, if you go look, and there's some great online calculators, some rent versus buy calculators. I use the one on NerdWallet. I think it's a great one. I'll throw the link in the show notes. One of the biggest differentiators between renting versus buying in those calculators is quite simply how many years you plan on staying in that residence. If your plan is to stay somewhere, if you're living in your forever city, if it's where you grew up and where all your family is and you're never going to move, in that case, buying makes a lot of sense because the major expense of buying a house, the frictional costs that you never get back, that feels like wasted money, the interest payments on your mortgage, that all occurs at the front end. Buying a house is a super front-loaded expense. And if you're planning on being there for long enough to get past those front-loaded expenses, that's when buying really becomes the smart choice. That's when you start building your equity. That's when you start gaining on the renting idea. I mean, the reason why renting exists in the first place, the reason why it's a reasonable business proposition for renters, for many of them at least, is because they might say, well, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I don't know how long I want to live in this particular city or in this particular neighborhood. Maybe I'm a young worker coming to a new city for a first-time job. Who knows if I'll stay here or not? Maybe I just don't have the assets right now to put a down payment on a house, and I need some sort of temporary solution. Renting makes a lot of sense there. And then earlier, I mentioned the second big question has to do with landlords. I mean, ultimately, you have to ask yourself, do the pros of having a landlord outweigh the cons? Now, for a lot of renters, they would say yes. The fact that they have someone who comes in and fixes the leaking sink, someone who plows the driveway, someone who takes care of essentially running the household. All they have to do is live there and keep their own space clean. That's a really nice perk. It's not great that you aren't building any equity, but there's pros and cons to that deal. So ultimately, renting versus buying, I mean, if you look at the return on investment of residential real estate in the past 100 years in the US, inflation adjusted, it is something like 0.5% per year, which suggests that buying is not necessarily a great investment. We already covered that earlier. And then obviously we all know that renting is, strictly speaking, throwing your money away. I'm using air quotes there because we know you're getting something valuable by renting. You're getting a valuable service. But just when it comes to building your net worth over time, it's not ideal. And so anyway, that leads me just to summarize my opinion that rent versus buy, neither one is great. But you need to ask yourself some fundamental questions about numbers, math, and the landlord to figure out which one is right for you. Number 7. This is a fun one. Number 7. Most of us are spoiled. I'm reading a book right now. It's called Factfulness. And it's really interesting. Highly recommend it so far. I'm only about halfway through, so maybe I'm prematurely recommending it to you guys. But so far, I really enjoy it. It's been eye-opening. And one of the cool things that the book does is it divides the world's population into 4 income quadrants. Group 1 lives off of less than $2 per day. Group 2 lives off of between $2 and $8 per day. Group 3 lives off of between $8 and $32 a day. And group 4 lives off of more than $32 a day. And just some back of the envelope math here. You could be level 4, you could be group 4, you could be living off of $40 a day. And that's about, $14,500 a year. I mean, an American would say $40 a day, 14 grand a year, that is poverty level. But if you really zoom out to the entire world, you are in the wealthiest group of people. For those keeping track at home, there's about 1 billion people at level 4, about 2 billion people in level 3, about 3 billion people in level 2, and then about 1 billion people in level 1. So most Americans, including Americans who are living in American poverty, which is not good. Poverty is not good. But even those who are living off of, say, $20,000 a year here in America, they are living in the upper echelon of world citizens. And most of us listening to this podcast, though, now most of us, I know the people who are listening to this podcast, we are all over the age spectrum from 25 to some of us are 55 plus. We are all over the income spectrum, but on average, a lot of us are middle class or upper middle class. And we truly are in the 1% globally in so many ways. We spend money in ways that the rest of the world finds luxurious. We spend money in ways that our own grandparents would find luxurious, that put us in the top 1% of all humans who ever lived. But then we turn around at the end of the month or at the end of the year and we say things like, man, life is expensive and money is tight. Yeah, but guess what? That's what you get. If you spend money in ways that no one else on earth can afford to spend money, you are living a luxurious lifestyle. It might make you feel a little bit tight at the end of the month, but you also have to realize the fact that we're living it up. We're living a great life. So just to point out exactly what I'm saying, I'm going to list some items here. And after each item, ask yourself, is it a necessity or is it a luxury? The first one, multiple bathrooms inside a house, specifically inside a house. Okay. Multiple bathrooms inside a house. The second one, queen and king size beds. The third item, retirements. That's it. The idea that at some point you won't need to work anymore. The fourth one, grocery stores that are absolutely teeming with food. The fifth one, paved sidewalks. 6, clean, hot tap water. 7, underground, high quality sewage and sanitation. The 8th one, Wi-Fi everywhere. And the 9th one, multiple pairs of all clothes. Now, those 9 items, most people living at level 3 in the world have few, if any, of those 9 items. So if you have those 9 items, you are living a life of luxury compared to the rest of the world. Maybe not compared to your neighbors. And that's why this whole keeping up with the Joneses thing is so dangerous. It melts our brains when we compare ourselves to our neighbors. And we forget the fact that the rest of the world isn't living like us, that we are kings compared to the rest of the world. So anyway, a bit of a diatribe, but I just think perspective is an amazing thing. I think having the perspective that we are lucky or that we're spoiled or that we should count our blessings, whatever language you want to use, it's a perspective that will make you happier. Because if you raise your expectations above that and you start saying something like, I deserve this life, I earned this life, that all those lists that Jesse said, that's just table stakes and that should just go without saying. And if you were to take that away from me, I'd be pissed. Well, you're setting yourself up for disappointment there. It also flies in the face of how humans lived for the 100,000 years before 1990, something like that. So anyway, that's a good one. You guys might disagree with me, and that's okay, but I think that most of us are spoiled. Going on to number 8, this is another one that's a little bit saucy here. Blaming billionaires for problems does little to solve your problems. Now, some of you might be going like, Jesse, what a repugnant thing to say. Now, it's not that you shouldn't care about reforming a system where we have 500,000 homeless people in this country, which we do, but we also have 4.5 trillion with a T, as in T-Rex, $4.5 trillion in the hands of about 756 billionaires, because we also have that. So just to go over those two facts again, 500,000 homeless people in the USA, but we also have $4.5 trillion in the hands of 750 billionaires. I think it's okay to think that that is a systemic problem, worth understanding, worth thinking about, and worth solving in some way, just getting some semblance of income and wealth equality, so at least that guy's not living in the ditch while that guy has $10 billion. Like finding a little bit of a way to balance that is worth thinking about. But blaming or hating billionaires for where they are, it's wasted energy. It does little to improve your personal situation. It does little to improve the situation of the people living in the ditch. So anyway, I think we do need to change that mindset, or at least personally. I mean, I try not to hate billionaires simply for being billionaires. If they're pricks, I can hate them for being a prick. But when I look at Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, like they seem like pretty reasonable dudes to me. They're both billionaires. I worked for a billionaire in Wisconsin. Epic Medical Records was my first job out of college, Madison, Wisconsin. The founder, and maybe even the second in command now of Epic, billionaires. Were they quirky? Yeah, they were quirky, but they were also really charitable people by all measures on the outside, seemed like really nice people. So anyway, I think hating billionaires is just a lot of wasted energy, and you're better off actually trying to bring some change to the world.
Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Serious question. Why do podcasters constantly ask for ratings and reviews? Yes, they do help highlight our shows to new listeners. They help strangers find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's totally true and a good reason to ask for ratings and reviews. But I have something more important, at least more important to me.
I want to know if you like this stuff. I want to know if you like my podcast episodes, my monologues, my guests, the information I share with you and the stories I tell. I want to improve and make your listening more enjoyable in the process. So yeah, I would love to read your reviews. And sure, if you throw a rating in there too, that's great. If you like what I'm doing, please share it with me. It's such a great feeling to read your feedback. I'd love to read your review or see a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you. Okay, let's go into chapter 2 here. Some things that I've changed my mind on in the personal finance and investing space. Now, when I got started on the best interest at that time, I followed a bunch of financial independence stuff on Reddit. And for what it's worth, I think the financial independence movement is wonderful. I think so many great lessons are taught there. I still consider myself part of it, even though I don't talk about it or write about it that much. I don't consider myself a FIRE blogger or a FIRE podcaster, but I still consider myself part of the movement. But, as I talked about earlier in this very episode, too many people in the FIRE movement believe that 100% stock portfolios are the right solution. They can be an okay solution if you're building your wealth, right? If you're 22 now and you want to retire at 40, and if you're in a 100% stock portfolio right now, I could be convinced of that, totally convinced of that. Even that being said, my retirement, I still think is going to be more than 2 decades away. I'm not 100% stocks, right? I have asset class diversification, bonds, alternatives, real estate. I don't think you should be going after the biggest possible pile of gold. And essentially, that's what 100% stock investing does. It says, I just want the biggest possible pile of gold. Instead, you should think about having the highest probability that you reach your goals. And what that can mean is preventing situations where you fall off the wagon because you got punched in the face. And that's another, we talked about that earlier. The stock market drops by a significant amount and your portfolio gets punched in the face and you fall off the investing wagon because you say, this really sucks. That's something you want to avoid. You also just want to have more near-term liquidity. You want to have the ability to rebalance. So I've changed my mind over the years on asset class diversification. I think it's a great thing. I invest that way myself. Number 2, detailed budgeting. Now, for a long, long time, probably from before I started the best interest, so we'll call it like 2017 until about a year ago, I was a very, very detailed budgeter. I did my best. I was never perfect, but I did my best to literally track every single penny I spent. When I bought a pack of chewing gum for 79 cents with cash, I would make a note of it in my app and say, gum, 79 cents, cash. So that at the end of the month, if I did my job right, I could reconcile and say, my budget tells me I should have $47 cash in my wallet right now. Do I? My budget tells me I should have $779 in checking right now. Do I? I was doing that. And on the one hand, it was terrific because when it comes to monthly cash flow, I knew exactly where my money was going all the time. I could plan and track money so well. And it was one of the big game changers in my personal finance story. But it was a bit overdone. And when I married Kelly, September of 2022, so it's been, 16, 17 months now, Kelly wasn't into budgeting like that. Kelly's got great personal finance habits, but she just wasn't into budgeting like that. So instead, what we did, we finally kind of sat down and really combined our finances in a meaningful way this past summer. We have now started tracking our net worth on a monthly basis. We update our account numbers into a spreadsheet that we share, like a Google spreadsheet, so we can see each other's bank account numbers and credit card debts and investment account numbers, yada, yada, yada. But from that alone, I can go month over month and I can see how our cash flow has been over the past month. And it basically provides the same information that my budgeting did before, right? I can say, well, this month, our total bank accounts have $40,000. And last month, our total bank accounts had $38,000. So we were plus $2,000 for the month in terms of cash flow. Great. That's about all you need, or at the very least, that's where you need to start. If you start there and sometimes you realize that you have a month over month trend that you're losing cash, that you're spending more than you're earning, okay, in that case, you might have to break out the credit card statements and try to understand why are we overspending. But you don't need a highly detailed budget to do this right. And that's something that I've changed my mind on over time because Kelly and I are now, we're not doing the highly detailed budgeting anymore, but we are still measuring our money. We're still tracking our money and we're doing just fine. We're just doing it in a more coarse way as opposed to the fine way that I was doing it before. What I've changed my mind on, number 3, college. Now, I went to college. I have 2 degrees from college, and I totally think it was the right move. But there was a time when I thought to myself, I'm sitting there at whatever, age 21 or 22 or 23, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm glad that I have a good GPA, because for the rest of the time, my employers are going to look at that as a positive thing. And the simple truth is that's not true. GPA is a signal. It's a useful signal. It's a signal that says this person has a good combination of being smart and working hard, right? If you come out of college with a 3.9 GPA, employers are going to look at you and say, great, this person is smart and they worked hard. And that's a good signal, a positive signal that gives them confidence when they hire you. But then once they hire you, well, now you have to be smart and work hard at your job. And if 6 months down the line, you're not smart and not working hard at your job, and they think about firing you, you're not going to be able to go to them and say, but I have a 3.9 GPA. They don't care, right? The real world doesn't really care about the number. What they care about is if you're smart and if you work hard. There's a great video that I found of a gentleman who talks about the 11 essentials of client service. And one of them is your clients don't care if you're good looking. Your clients don't care if you're a scratch golfer. They don't care if you're a member of the exclusive club. What they really care about is this person smart, and are they going to work hard for me? Are they going to apply the smart thinking and their hard work ethic to benefit my situation? So that's what I think about at work. And it's served me well so far. When it comes to my clients, am I the smoothest talker? I don't know. I try to be a helpful person. I try to be a good teacher. And more than anything else, I just try to be smart, and I try to work hard to benefit their situation. That's what the real world wants. So college, GPA, it's not all it's cracked up to be. What is really important is being able to prove to the real world that you're smart and that you're gonna work hard. All right, number 4, something I've changed my mind on. Advisors. Okay, we're going to dive into this because this is a juicy one. When I peruse the world of LinkedIn and I see coaches, I see agencies, I see stuff like that, executive coaches, and I'm an agent. I'm not sure what I'm an agent of, but I'm running an agency. What I found is that there's such a wide spectrum of coaches and agencies out there. And it's really hard to discern at times the difference between someone who's been a quote unquote coach, maybe like a career coach or an executive coach, and they've got a 35-year career and they've got actual experience as a CEO. They have actual experience as a teacher, maybe in their prior life. And so they have these bona fides that make them an amazing coach, and they've had amazing clients, and their amazing clients have been really happy with them. And you say, wow, that is a coach, and that coach is great. But then you also might have a quote unquote executive coach or a life coach or something like that. And it's some 29-year-old dude who just got fired from his temp job at the accounting firm, and he doesn't know what else to do. So he's going to become a life coach because he can talk the talk and maybe convince a few poor schmucks to pay him money. And you realize, they have the same title, life coach, executive coach. The vast valley, the canyon between these two people is huge. The spectrum is wide, and advisors are similar. There's an extremely wide spectrum when it comes to financial advisors, financial planners, wealth planners, money coaches, so many titles for ostensibly the same thing. On one end of the spectrum, you have experienced, intelligent professionals offering deep knowledge, deep expertise for fair prices. And on the other hand, you have unknowledgeable hacks with 2 weeks of shady corporate training, shilling some sort of overpriced product to anyone with a pulse. Both these people can and often are called financial advisors. And it's really hard for the average person to look at that and say, well, to me, are they both crooks? Are they both good? I don't know. And one problem is that the negative end of the spectrum, because they are so negative, oftentimes and often do cloud the positive end of the spectrum and casts a bit of a shadow over the whole industry. So I wrote an article last year. We'll throw it in the show notes. It's the 12 questions you should ask your financial advisor. And the whole reason why is it's to help you fend for yourself and try to sift through the many different advisors out there. There are some fantastic questions that you can and should ask the advisor you're already working with, or potentially the advisor that you're thinking about working with, to help you better understand who is this person? What end of the spectrum do they lie on? There was a time when I was just starting out, and again, very involved in the FIRE movement, and I said, all financial advisors are bad. But then I met many financial advisors through the best interest, And I realized, yes, some of them are bad. Some of them are extremely helpful. And some of them provide a service and a level of expertise to their clients at a reasonable price that their clients would be completely lost without them. Aunt Ethel, who has no idea what she's doing, and it just makes her nervous to log on to Fidelity in the first place. She wants help. She needs help, and she needs someone to do it in a fair, reasonable way at a fair price. There are good advisors. There are bad advisors. I think that we all owe ourselves. Not everybody needs an advisor. That's really important to understand, right? If I hadn't changed careers, if I'm not working here at a wealth management firm, I was a DIY investor and I loved this stuff enough. I was a nerd for this tax stuff and some of these planning topics that I was also a DIY planner. I did my own financial plan. I did my own investment allocation. I didn't need to hire someone, but the reason why is because I spent a lot of time learning this stuff. And a lot of you listening, the reason why you're here, I get it. Like, you're DIYers. I'm helping you learn a little bit more. Some of you are helping me learn. It's awesome. And you might not need an advisor too. And I think that's really important to understand. But there are some people out there who greatly benefit from the help of advisors. And it's something I've changed my mind about over recent years. There are different fee models, as you guys know. Some fee models are right for some people. I think if you're an uber DIY person and you need someone to double check your numbers, right, you should probably hire like an hourly or a project-based advisor. If you're someone whose life is pretty complicated, you want to offload everything in your life to someone else. In that case, the hourly advisor, they'll tell you they don't really want to be completely offloaded onto. You still want to make sure they're a fee-only fiduciary, but you might need an AUM advisor in that case. So anyway, different strokes for different folks. The last thing I've changed my mind on, I'm sure it's not really the last thing, it's just the last thing on my list, is the concept of paying yourself first. Everybody, calm down. Yes, you should definitely pay yourself first. I'm not saying that the idea is wrong, but I do think you should only pay yourself so much. For a while, I paid myself first so much that the rest of my life became a financial burden. And so depending on your income, I do recommend that you get your full 401k match first. You should pay yourself first there. And ideally, if you can afford to, you should max out your Roth IRA first. You should pay yourself first there. Or, if you need a backdoor Roth IRA, execute that. But then after those two things, I think you should live your life a little bit. You should use some of your money to do fun things. You should prioritize living life right now. And then after you do a little bit of living life right now, then you can pay yourself more after that. And then you can start to go back and forth, allocate some dollars to the present moment, to near-term fund savings, then allocate some dollars to the long-term, retirement style savings, back and forth, back and forth. You should pay yourself first. You just want to make sure that you're also able to live a fun life right now. And I suppose I should also talk about some things that I still think are essential to true wealth. Some things I haven't changed my opinion on. I promise you this one will be short, but this will be very beneficial. I've got 6 thoughts here, and I think each and every one of you should probably be applying these 6 thoughts into your financial life. The first one, understanding your monthly cash flow is the basic personal finance building block from which all other success flows. If you don't know your cash flow, you are lost. I highly recommend each and every one of you understands what your monthly cash flow, that is the money coming in and the money going out of your life, what your monthly cash flow looks like. Number 2, wealth is what you don't see. True wealth is the sports car unpurchased, the boring meals at home. It's that kind of stuff. I recently saw a young guy. This is a true story. I'm guessing he was 25. He was driving a $150,000 car, a $150,000 car. And I honestly thought to myself, I said, well, like 2% of me thinks good for you. And the other 98% feels really bad for you. Now, I don't know the guy, right? So maybe he's in a financial position where the car fits in perfectly for his long-term plans. That's the 2%. But for 98% of the population of 25-year-old men, that car is a terrible financial decision and is the exact opposite of true wealth. So wealth is what you don't see. Number 3, automate. Automate as much of your finances as you can. If you don't automate, I would bet against your long-term success. I know some people are successful without automating, but if you're not automating, I would not bet for you. I would bet against you. I think you need to automate as much as you can in your financial life. Number 4, diversify. You should diversify between asset classes, stocks, bonds, real estate, etc., and within asset classes, meaning Large stocks, small stocks, US stocks, international stocks. Diversification is the only free lunch. Now, there's one exception to this rule. If your personal goal is to die atop the biggest pile of money possible, you should not diversify. You should concentrate into a few positions as possible, actually, and then you should pray. But if your goal is to live your current lifestyle comfortably, to retire securely, to sit back and relax and let your portfolio do your thing, you should diversify. Number 5, buy and hold. Investing is a long-term game, and your portfolio is like a bar of soap. The more you touch it, the quicker it disappears. And number 6, hanging around people who have mastered their finances is a life hack. Just watch what they do and take inspiration from it. So that's what I like to do. That's why I read and listen to so many podcasts. That's why I like talking to not only my colleagues here at work, I like talking to other advisors who I respect in the community, because I think hanging around people who have done well in their finances is a great way to learn. And I hope that you guys continue to hang out here and take a little bit of wisdom from me, because I'm happy to share it. I enjoy sharing it. Maybe you can take a little bit of inspiration from it. What do they say? What do I say? A rising tide lifts all ships. All right, guys, that's all I've got today. As always, thank you for tuning in to the Best Interest Podcast. You know how to reach me, jesse@bestinterest.blog. Some useful stuff in the show notes that we talked about today. And until next time, over and out.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Best Interest Podcast. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email at jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves, and we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Best Interest Podcast. The Best Interest Podcast is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice and is not prescriptive of your financial situation.